warm welcome to another special episode of the Monday Morning Learning Podcast. Very glad to have Sai Sulakshana Bhatti Narayanan today as our guest. Sairam, and warm welcome to you, Sulakshana. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, brother. Thank you for having me here. I think it's beautiful that you've curated all of these beautiful sessions. So I'm waiting to see how today's session turns out.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So, Sulakshana, a quick introduction to the themes that we're going to run through so that the audience actually knows what we're going to cover. So we're doing 5 themes today, starting off with regenerative leadership, rethinking the why of work. Secondly, inner work, outer impact, the role of mindfulness in leadership. Then we'll move on to culture as a living system, designing for belonging and purpose. And conscious systems, aligning strategy, people, and sustainability. And we'll end with wisdom in complexity, navigating change with grace. These are the 5 themes that we'll be looking at. And for the audience, a quick introduction to Sulakshana. She's a strategic people leader, inner systemic transformation and regenerative approach. That's her tagline. And she's having over more than, I think, 15 years of experience, Sulakshana, more than that now.
Yeah,
okay. Driving impactful people project process initiatives that align with business strategy, empower leaders, and enhance employee and stakeholder experiences. She brings deep experience collaborating with C-suite leaders, leading cross-functional teams, and translating complex people data into actionable insights. And her work is guided by a passion for building inclusive, high-performing teams that make business as usual both human and high impact. She's got a lot of introduction, but I think I'll make it neat as of now. So, Sulakshana, let's start off with the themes now. Any welcome words before we start off?
I think if people are able to take back or at least resonate with 1% of what we discussed today, to decode some aspect of life and leadership, I would consider this a win. So let's see.
Absolutely. So the first couple of questions to you is under the theme of regenerative leadership, rethinking the why of work. What does this term regenerative leadership mean to you in today's volatile workspace, and how can leaders shift from extractive to regenerative mindsets without losing performance edge selection?
Okay. So I think I would like to take this in a little bit of a larger context.
Sure.
Kind of like a volatile world, because we are on the precipice of something larger, and we see it in the uncertainty and in a way anxiety, anguish, as well as the urgency that we see in the collective. As always, I'd like to start with the why, because if people are not sold at the level of the why, they're not truly or fully sold. So probably we can paint 2 pictures. One with a story. Do you remember the parable of the blind men, where each of them describe what the elephant is based on their positioning and what they touch? Basically, the story is helping us understand the human tendency to claim absolute truths based on our own subjective experience without factoring in someone else's experience, or probably even taking a step back and looking at something holistically.
Yeah.
So that is a story-based painting of what regenerative leadership is. And now let's look at it with a number.
Sure.
They say that in order to know where we are going, we need to know where we have come from. And if we see historically, it took us from 1830 to 1930, 100 years for us to come to the first 1 billion human population. Now we are in 2025, 5 years away from 2030, but we are estimating 8.5 billion population. That's how tremendously we have grown, and that's definitely all thanks to the innovations in agriculture, industry, technology. While that's awesome, what was interesting, if we look at our own history, is it was not until the early 1970s that we realized that, oh, wait a minute, we have not factored in the well-being of the environment and the ecosystem.
Yes.
And they actually say, there is this report as of 2016, what we consume in 1 year, the fossil fuel consumption, it takes 1 million years for it to be made underground.
Wow.
So the consumption level has been beyond limit, right? Which is why, as of 2023, if we actually see, we have crossed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries.
Right.
But anyway, coming back to the 1970s, um, when they decided that, okay, we need to really think about the ecosystem. But it was not until 15 years later, in 1987, that the term sustainable development came into play. And the triple bottom line was formed with people, planet, and profit. And what has happened with time is, of course, while we work towards currently working towards the sustainable development goals towards 2030, COVID happened in 2020, and we realized in our own journey towards growth and development that, oh, wait a minute, it's not that we forgot the ecosystem's well-being, we forgot our own well-being as well. And that's how now a lot of conscious conversations around well-being has come into account, both in personal circles as well as in professional circles, right? So regenerative leadership is that. Why regenerative leadership, or why now, is because it's systemic. It understands that we are all interconnected. Your best interest is my interest, my best interest, and the together approach that we have by mirroring how does nature actually flourish through the ups and downs of its own cycle. Can we mimic that and bring it into our communities, into our work cultures, so that not only we survive, but we thrive?
Absolutely.
Not only it is about us, but also the future generation, but also about the other life form, because that's what makes the planet together. And I think based on the climate of the collective, in one sense, I think I do see a lot of conscious conversation happening around this, and more people are definitely gearing towards a regenerative approach. And it is simply, what is regenerative approach is, it is not only about minimizing negative impact, but can we consciously bring in vitality? How can we ensure that we all thrive together and make the journey worthwhile?
Right.
The future generation as well.
Absolutely.
Right? And you were talking about how do we encourage people from this whole extractive mindset to a regenerative mindset. I think mainly from the context of performance, right? Because a lot of workplace paradigm is definitely performance oriented.
Right.
But in my own observation, as I have seen as well, regenerative approach is not anti-performance. In fact, it is pro-performance, mainly because these are people with regenerative mindsets are pro all life, which means they are not just going to abide by the status quo. They are going to go above and beyond. They are like, what can I do in my best interest of people around me, of my community, of my dog, of the people on the road, of the nature, everything around us. So these are definitely very people who are performance driven. And interestingly, there is this person called Amy Edmondson. She is a Harvard professor, and she has written this book called The Fearless Organization. And she talks about psychological safety there.
Right.
And she says that the last century management paradigm was fear-based or authoritative-based, because a lot of that was routine work in some sense, which could be done at a large scale level. And people also invariably worked in the same domain or company or function for a longer time.
Yeah.
But the nature of the society today is much complex. There is a lot of uncertainty, and we also are much more aware of how interconnected we all are.
Absolutely.
And in this paradigm, we are all in a learner's mindset, right? And they are also recognizing that now in the world of AI and all of that, the only skill set that all of us need is a growth mindset, a learner's mindset. Because we need to constantly adapt, constantly reiterate, reflect on what has been done, and probably try something different altogether.
Hmm.
So coming back to Amy's approach as well, that's why she says that curiosity is the twin sister of humility.
Right.
Um, because we need to encourage people that it's okay to make mistakes,
Hmm.
but how can we learn together?
Yep.
And that is regenerative approach, because it's inclusive, it's caring, it understands the processes, the people that we work with in
Yep.
totality rather than in isolation.
Hmm.
And interestingly, I was recently watching this conversation between Kevin Leary of Shark Tank.
Hmm.
He was in this podcast with Stephen from Diary of the CEO.
Yep.
And what I've noticed is, like, for instance, a lot of women leaders like Lena Nair do positively talk about kindness and inclusion.
Hmm.
And Kevin was saying that he has worked closely with Steve Jobs, and he says that he's pro respect and not kindness as such.
Right.
But also, he went on to quote his own observation, as well as what is an apparent statistic in the corporate world, is in terms of women leaders tend to be much more realistic in their targets,
Hmm.
which is around 15% growth rate, and 90% plus women achieve their targets,
Right.
versus men who probably will aim for a 30% growth rate,
Yep.
and only around 65% of them would achieve.
Right.
And that's also fundamentally because, again, there is a little bit of stereotyping and generalization here.
Hmm.
Because I myself have seen a lot of male leaders as well who embody very conscious leadership, inclusive, regenerative approach.
Hmm.
And I think we are definitely changing the way we lead people and we lead teams. That's wonderful. But I think there is a little bit of validity in this statistic, mainly because women are much more enabled, if for want of a better word,
Hmm.
to bring in their holistic side in terms of emotional intelligence and all of that.
Yeah.
While aggression and authority is mainly the status quo of male leaders. So
Hmm.
all of those challenges do exist, because, which is why regenerative leadership is key, because we are bringing in understanding from nature, from
Yeah.
psychology and human behavior, indigenous practices, and all of that.
Yeah.
So we are able to see our fellow leaders, our teams from multiple lens. We are
Yeah.
not siloing them into, like, you're a cog in the machine, get X or Y done
Yeah.
within a certain time. And the more openness we bring into the team and give them that kind of a leeway, and create that kind of psychological safety,
Hmm.
it definitely shows up in performance. According to McKinsey, actually, they say organizations that are inclusive in nature exceed profitability on an average 36%.
Wow.
So these are, because, again, that goes back to psychology. Safety is the fundamental level,
Hmm.
and Amy talks about it in her book as well. Because not everybody may have a psychological understanding. But when we bring interdisciplinary knowledge into the work culture,
Yeah.
then we realize that, okay, safety actually brings in innovation, learning, and growth.
Yeah.
And that is the foundation for all of the organizations anyway. So I think when we talked about male leaders, Zohu's Sridhar Vembu is a great example.
Yeah.
I have loved his philosophy and approach. And I think he is a good example of a regenerative leader. And it does show that it is a regenerative mindset, pro performance, and it has done well in the world, but also in a conscious way. So I think this is definitely a worthwhile model to emulate at a larger level.
Absolutely, Sulakshana. Thanks so much for going into a greater detail. I think it's almost the first time I'm having a guest giving the relevant examples and explaining concepts so easily to understand, Sulakshana. So very good start. Thank you for that. So let's move on to the second one in terms of inner work, outer impact, the role of mindfulness in leadership. Again, a couple of questions are around how has your personal journey with emotional intelligence and mindfulness shaped your leadership practice? And in your experience, what blocks inner transformation from becoming organizational change selection?
Yeah. So I would like to share a quote from this book, Regenerative Leadership, as a start to this session.
Sure.
And it goes thus. Social ecologist Gregory foresaw how the separating of mind from matter, spirit from nature, creates all sorts of problems. For Bateson, this separation is an error of the most fundamental degree. This error, Bateson saw, woven into Western habits of thought at deep and partly unconscious levels, undermining our capacity to flourish sustainably on Earth. He felt that it is what pits humanity against nature and provides for a prevalent worldview of survival through competition.
Right.
So you were talking about the personal journey, right? So for me, what is both surprising and fascinating when I come across books like this, or even in my own personal journey, is we've all come from the same alma mater. I'm sure we've all started with social impact as a big part of what we do in our day-to-day, right? I had likewise started in the same this thing, and with social impact went into animal welfare, read about interspecies communication because I have my own dog as well currently, and species appropriate living, species appropriate behavior, because the ideology is, as they say, even in inclusion, it is not about treating the other person or the other life form the way you want to be treated.
Yeah.
It is the way they want to be treated. That is true inclusion. So the more we sit with each of these different sciences and fields, likewise even sustainability, even when I was looking at the whole psychology aspects as well, and people who are now pioneers of mindfulness at workplace and generally, like Tara Burke, there is a clinical psychologist called Marshall Rosenberg. He again went into his own practice and came up with a model called nonviolent communication. So if I actually look at each of these things, and now currently, even the fact that DIEB came into the corporate circle, mindfulness, well-being, and now we're talking about regenerative leadership, a lot of it, the foundation is definitely in the Eastern philosophy and the mindset in terms of taking it a little beyond, being holistic and understanding the interconnectedness of life. So in that sense, that's how we are now taking it to another level of deeper nuance and deeper discussion, where we want to bring conscious business practices.
Right.
So in that sense, I feel regenerative leadership has taken us into a full circle within the corporate paradigm. And interestingly, this person who wrote, Laura Storm, the Regenerative Leadership book, she's an international keynote speaker, and the World Economic Forum has also, I think, she is, I think, global change maker, or she has been given a specific young global leader or something like that within her 30s.
Sure.
So now, even from an economic perspective, people are understanding why sustainability and regenerative approach is important. But tying back it to the question of personal journey, while I'm seeing it at play elsewhere, I have seen that at play even in my own life journey, both personally and professionally, because I have touched upon similar spectrums.
Sure.
How it has helped my practice was also in terms of deepening the EI aspect, the mindfulness, along with a little bit of an Eastern philosophy approach. Because then it gives a lot more of a compassionate understanding in terms of why we need to do. Like I said, the more we are sold at the level of the why, then we will definitely implement it, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So maybe for the audience to also resonate with this, can we do a small exercise?
Sure.
Yeah. So this is a thought experiment that someone called Sam Harris. He is a neuroscientist. He has created this app called Waking Up. He is a mindfulness practitioner, but takes a very secular approach to it.
Okay.
So this is the thought experiment. Can you share with me your top 3 favorite songs?
Top 3 favorite songs. I mean, all 3 are bhajans kind of.
That's fine.
Sai Mata Pita Deena Bandhu Sakha is one. Dina Dukhiyon Se Prem Karo is one. Aja Anubahum Arvind Netram is one. Yeah.
Beautiful buttons. What would happen is, like for instance, imagine how many songs or bhajans you must have listened in across the last 10 years or even over your life, right?
Yeah.
Thousands for sure.
Yeah.
But if we just look at this particular question and the response that came, how does thought typically work? It is not like you remembered all of the 1,000 songs,
Yeah.
you sifted through them, and you decided these are my top 3, right?
Yeah.
It is possible that later on in the day, maybe you're driving somewhere and you hear another bhajan, you're like, oh my God, I should have said this. This is my favorite bhajan,
Yeah.
right? So basically, this is that Eastern philosophy dimension to mindfulness or emotional intelligence. Another thing is because we are not creating our thoughts, they arise in our awareness, right? Which means we are not primarily the driving force behind what we think or how we think or why we think. The minute we understand that, by default, whenever we see some lapse either in ourselves or others, or even have conflicting truths that we need to hold space for, probably be holding space for a dysfunction or iniquity or a lot of other moral injury based things that could happen, in a way, this understanding that there is a little bit of compassion that arises because we understand that nobody is deciding to think a certain way. That's one of the reasons people are trying to find different mediums and means to make themselves feel better or do better things. And that's why we have CBT, DBT, and a lot of other therapeutic approaches.
Right.
Because based on one's conditioning and experiences, thoughts arise in consciousness in various ways. And there could be a lot of fundamental reasons why that happens, right? So the minute we understand that, there is definitely a little bit of compassion that arises, so we are able to give it space. But a little bit of a disclaimer here, which is again, because this would make one question, then where does reform come in picture, right? And I remember there was this wonderful conversation that I once listened to, that, like for instance, when we talk about reform or justice and all of those things, if no one is creating thoughts by default, then whose responsibility is it? Those kind of questions may arise.
Yeah.
But when there is safety involved and the need for structure and all of those things, certain reforms need to be made in place. So the need for this clarity to understand the nature of thought is mainly for us to come to a place of non-judgment and compassion.
Right.
But not to, avoid accountability or avoid reform.
Yeah.
This is basically to understand that the complexity of being human is beyond one's capacity, and we bring that approach into our personal and professional lives, so that when we see a misstep or there is a lack of clarity and all of that, we sit with it to see, can we ensure there is a certain reform in place, there is a certain system or process in place to ensure this doesn't happen again. So that is one end of this thing. Emotional intelligence, likewise, is in terms of understanding how there are, they say 6 to 8 primary basic emotions is what we have.
Mm-hmm.
And again, how emotions arise is, let's say, um, we hear a loud thud or a loud noise in the next room, and probably we have a kid or a dog, and you will be startled. The first instinct, you will have a physiological response, and there could also be the primary emotion that is surfacing.
Yeah.
And then thoughts come into play, and based on what the thought is, you may either fear the worst, and then you will have corresponding feeling. And then once you go there, you may be relieved, saying, okay, it was just maybe something fell and it's okay, nobody was affected.
Yeah.
Right? So this again goes to show that thoughts and emotions on its own can spin their stories, but it could be far away from the reality and the truth of what a situation is.
Absolutely.
But having said that, of course, there is validity in all of these thoughts and emotions as well. In fact, emotions are the driving force for a lot of action to happen as well by default.
Yeah.
So the more we understand all of these things as leaders, then we understand why someone's why is in a certain way. What is their survival responses? And what is their passion about? What are their fears and needs? Maybe there is a fear of speaking up, or there is an imposter syndrome, which means we need to look at upskilling or mentoring or coaching, right? And knowing someone's apology languages, survival responses, which is again with a little bit of psychological understanding, then helps us see what could be a personal challenge are they going through currently that is maybe affecting their performance. And how can we as leaders ensure that we both give them a good platform to ensure that they're able to get to the next level, or if they need a little bit of a downtime, is there somebody else who can take their place? So what I've observed in my whole journey is the more we are understanding of these nuances at play, you do invariably see your team lean into you and learn from you and look to embody that in their own way. And I think that's definitely, and that's how we leave our trail of conscious practices, right?
Absolutely. Great answer there, Sulakshana. A lot to reflect for me personally. I think once I'm done with this, I'll go through it and make notes as well. I'll come back to you with more questions though. Coming to the next one, culture as a living system designing for belonging and purpose. Questions around what practices have you seen succeed in building inclusive and values-aligned cultures at scale? And how can diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging evolve from being a checklist to a living experience according to you?
Yeah. I think listening is definitely key. Interestingly, circling back to the whole Kevin's conversation as well, he said how one of his executive female leader had come to him and said, Kevin, why don't you reverse your equation? Instead of talking 2/3 of the time, listen 2/3 of the time and speak for 1/3 of the time. Because, and again, the Eastern philosophy equation to that is, there is this Vietnamese monk called Thich Nhat Hanh. He says understanding is the language of love or inclusion. And how understanding happens is through attunement, deep listening and attention. Because that in a way also brings a lot of mindfulness. And the more mindful we are able to see the nuances at play, which will not be apparent otherwise, right? And the more we do that, there is a shared sense of ownership. We are creating alignment within the team, and they feel like we are co-creating things with them. So co-creating culture is definitely key. The issue sometimes when we were talking about blockers as well, the issue with either top down or bottom up approaches, it will not always come together because of how diverse we are as individuals. Our proclivities are different. Our passions could be different. Our whys are definitely different as well. But the how is something where we can align on, and that is through these practices of listening, of giving them this psychological safety to ensure that you can speak up. And it is not about, again, seniority here. I have worked a lot of Gen Zs that I've worked with as well. I have always been open to listen to their perspective, because there is something that they know that we may not know.
Yeah.
And it is about how can we learn, and it's kind of like that six thinking hats technique, where we juggle across different hats to see, okay, maybe this could work, that could work. And I feel all of those things have definitely helped seeing alignment in team. And there was this book that I read some time back. It's called The Social Brain. It is about the psychology of successful groups. There, the author says that there are seven parameters that usually ensures alignment in our close relationships, be it personal or professional. One is shared worldview, similar career experiences, shared humor, hobbies, music, region, the place we are from, dialect, speaking the same language.
Yeah.
So they say the 6 to 7 parameters, the more aligned we all are, the closer the relationship is. And for 3 teams to thrive as such, they say 50% is a good ratio. Why? Because if we are completely aligned, that is also good. It has its benefit, but we want diverse thought. We want a little bit of friction to brainstorm and to understand. Maybe there is a different perspective that I have not really looked at.
Yeah.
And this person who is aligned enough with me can now challenge me to say, why don't you think like this?
Yeah.
Right? So, and that would happen. A junior would walk up to me and say, if I give them the safe space to, yes, no holds barred, bring it on, right? And then that they feel empowered to bring that on to the table.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I did this certification on systemic constellation. It is a therapeutic approach brought in by this person called Bert Hellinger. It is, so the idea is that we all function in systems. Systems are there everywhere, within a family, within a community, within every nation is a system, every organization is a system, all of that, right? And they say that each system functions the way it functions because there are certain principles at play, either consciously or unconsciously, either overtly or covertly, right? And understanding these principles are key, because then as HR leaders, as people leaders, as leaders on a larger scale as well, the more we are aware in terms of how people either consciously or unconsciously work with one another. It could be based on conditioning, it could be based on biases, a lot of other things are at play. Then it helps us really understand how can we ensure the dynamic gets better, right? So coming back to this, the 3 principles that they talk about is the principle of belonging, which means anytime anybody is part of a system, it can even be within family or communities, nobody is ever ostracized. Everybody always belong, even if it's an ex-employee, ex-spouse, whatsoever, there is a reason why they have been part of the system.
Right.
And the other principle is the principle of order. There is a reason why someone comes first, someone comes second. And of course, I do know that a lot of this gets a little bit probably esoteric at some level, because it is, this approach is at the level of consciousness and energy rather than very gross physical aspects, right?
Yeah.
But all of these, in a way, make sense because when we reflect on it, we know that's how things are at play.
Mm.
The third principle is that of balance. There needs to be a mutual give and take to
Right.
some degree, right?
Mm.
If there isn't, if any system doesn't keep these measures or principles in order, invariably there will be some kind of disruption, not in a good way, obviously. But by
Right.
disruption in this sense is more in terms of something will come to shake up the system,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
And they also talk about leadership in that level, which is in terms of agency leadership, the one who has that long term vision, who strategizes
Mm.
and sets up frameworks to bring everything at play, execution based leadership,
Mm.
having the skill of the craft, knowing it very well,
Yeah.
being able to execute it, thought leadership, and all of that. The
Mm.
third is community leadership.
Yeah.
If a leader has all of the three, great. If not, at least the entire team should have these traits in one way or the other, because that's what makes a single system function effectively.
Yeah.
And so this is how I feel, in a way, what we are seeing in philosophies and psychologies, we do see it apply at work and personal life.
Mm.
And which is what regenerative leadership does. And in a way, when we bring a lot of things together in our, when we talk about strategy, we are thinking about how is the market, doing the 5P analysis and all of those things. We are not looking at anything in silo. We are actually bringing a lot of different aspects in play.
Yeah.
And so when we look at the whole individual in these patterns, as well as the system in these patterns, we definitely bring a lot more inclusion by default, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that makes it easier for everybody to bring their contribution onto the table.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Lakshana, is this your experience that whenever you actually talk, people tend to relate to you by actually going through their own kind of either relationships or the kind of scenarios they face? Because when you were actually talking, right, I was able to literally understand and go through and link up to what you were saying to what I'm actually going through, right? Is this something which is common when you talk?
Yes, and that's the beauty of regenerative leadership, is because we are so common, and we all are definitely diverse for sure, which is what brings us unique insights and all of those things to each other. But this is what deep listening, deep attunement does, because the more we sit with ourselves and we sit with the world, which is what they call as pratyahara, is like withdrawal. Somehow we are able to see the nuances at play. And which means, in a way, if it's true for me, it is true for you.
Yeah.
And it is true for a lot of others, probably in different flavors, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And this again satisfies the fundamental need that humans have, which is to be seen, heard, and understood.
Yeah.
Because this, have you heard of Gabor Mate? He is actually from the physician background, but he is someone who has gone into trauma psychology a lot more and talks about it. And I have personally been a big fan of him to understand the effects of trauma and dysfunction at a deeper level. Because when we talk about regenerative leadership as well, why individual is important is because what an individual is what the collective is.
Yeah.
And again, vice versa, what the system is makes you who you are. So, which again has its roots in developmental psychology,
right.
Which is what makes the first 18 years of any child very important, is because how is the primary caregiver giving them or meeting their fundamental needs that we talk in Maslow's hierarchy as well.
Yeah.
And the more we are able to look at the physical, mental, emotional aspects of that child in the growing up years, understanding that there is, again, the same psychological safety applies there.
Yeah.
It's not a question of judgment. We will never say this emotion is bad or this experience is bad. we take a very curious approach and sit with them to understand, because the more they feel safe with you, the more they open up. And that is how knowledge flowers, that is how innovation flowers, because that is how we work fundamentally. We need safety to be at our absolute best.
Absolutely.
So probably what could have worked in some levels in the last century, but we are seeing its repercussions now, very apparent, both collectively as well as individually, environmentally. Which is why I feel we are able to relate. Like, you are also able to connect with this, because this is the deep fundamental nature. In my own journey as well, I came across Buddhist psychology. I mean, while I was working with this thing, which has obviously very close roots to the mindfulness and all of that we see today. And once I wrote sometime back, because I have always been curious about dysfunction, disparity, and all of that in my life, because I had wanted to know, like, I had done social impact projects earlier, right from my 20s. And what I noticed is there are always challenges we come across every step of the way, right? I have people, friends in the developmental circle as well, in terms of funding, in terms of getting volunteers. All of these are challenging, but there is no dearth of wealth and resources in the world. However, it is not equally distributed, or there is definitely a pain point there. So one of the reasons I had also I had been curious, if I may say, to learn, is because the need to problem solve was definitely there. And I realized that that's what we do in our personal life, is what Buddha talks about, or the Buddhist psychology, and everywhere they talk about, is the Vedantic approach, the non-dual aspect that Ramana Maharshi, a lot of others expound. The fundamental reason why even spiritual masters, psychology, so many things come to the root is suffering. And what can you do to ensure it doesn't perpetuate anymore, right? And because the nature of suffering is similar, in a way, we are able to understand one another deeply, because how suffering impacts us, either personally, professionally, or in the work that we do, has similar scent, if I may say, even if not the same flavor or scent, right? And probably, let me see, I'll just draw one picture.
Sure.
So why are we able to see this kind of similarity are you able to see this?
I'm seeing
there are some four circles.
Yeah.
Okay. So assume this paper is consciousness, or the world as it is today, right? And world by default is what we call spiritually, or in Eastern philosophy, as consciousness. And this one circle could be me, another circle is you. Likewise, imagine billions of circles around, right? The reason we are able to find similarity in our experiences is because the circles have siloed us into thinking this is who we are. But the circle is obviously is in one sense above the paper, if you know what it means. Right? But the paper is what we are. It is just like how this guy Gregory said, the mind has made us think that this is the circle. So I am a woman, I am an Indian, I am X, I am Y, and all of that. And we have siloed our consciousness into thinking that, oh, I am circle 1, this is circle 2. I don't like circle 2 because maybe he's of a different label, maybe because he does X, Y, and Z. Maybe I like circle 3 because I'm finding a lot of similarity. But that's the beauty of it. Behind all of these circle is the same paper, which is what we are.
Hmm.
And I think regenerative leadership makes us understand that similarity, that interconnectedness. So people are able to relate to us
Hmm.
because we have. The more I know me, the more I know you. That's
Absolutely.
how it is.
Absolutely, Sulakshana. Thank you. So moving to the fourth one now, conscious systems and aligning strategy, people, and sustainability, Sulakshana. Now, you worked at the crossroads of HR, sustainability, and creative research. And how do you bring coherence to such diverse domains? That's number one. And what advice would you give to HR and business leaders trying to embed sustainability and purpose into people practices?
Okay. So this is again a very interesting question because I remember in my early days of exploration, whenever I've looked someone up on Wikipedia, it'd be like astronomer, mathematician, philosopher, some 5 different fields, and I always wondered how are we talking about siloed approaches? Why are we saying okay, do physics, do chemistry? Those things I have always thought about it. Not that I tried to consciously question at that point of time, but now based on seeing where I am currently, I also have invariably dabbled in multiple things because that's the way of life. Life brings you into various aspects, either overtly or covertly, that with curiosity we then dive a little bit deeper to understand.
Yeah.
But you know what was more interesting? I was reading Swami's man management book
Hmm.
recently, and then I didn't realize Swami had said this. Swami has said that I do not know why people are talking a lot about specialization. Um, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe there are some benefits to specialization, but from a moral and spiritual sense, it has no benefit. Um, and I was also thinking in terms of when I saw those Wikipedia pages as well, I
Hmm.
was thinking one of the reasons when I talk about systemic issues, I talk about educational systems is also because I feel that's where we need to change the educational system as well because we have brought in a lot of siloed approach there as well,
Hmm.
without giving a foundational, if not a professional understanding of be it finances, be it health and well-being,
Yeah.
mindfulness, right?
Hmm.
Understanding the environment, understanding other species, how do we coexist with each other,
Hmm.
or understanding even human behavior, right?
Yeah.
For me, the more I understand human behavior and development psychology, I don't have a kid myself, but my friends call me
Hmm.
when they have a certain issue with their child, is because we want to then see, okay, from the lens of development psychology, what could be at play and what
Hmm.
can we do to, change that or ensure that the um, child feels that it is safe and what kind of pressure maybe the child is going through, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when you talk about coherence, I feel the reason, like for instance, I went into research or program management and all of that is because I'm very process driven
Hmm.
and I am pretty analytical as well. I have Excel sheets and notes for my personal life. So, in that sense, I am pretty organized, but at the same time, there is a creative aspect, there is definitely a heart centered aspect as well.
Hmm.
And all of this, and the more I have kind of curiously and earnestly probably studied this or brainstorm about all of those things, I feel that there is definitely a better coherence because of this um, interdisciplinary knowledge rather than what could have happened within a siloed approach.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it is like, for instance, even if we talk about the organization as well, strategy gives people the direction. People are the ones who give the momentum, and
Yeah.
each of the functions bring in their own um, what to say expertise, and
Hmm.
which is what makes a company successful.
Yeah.
If only siloed approaches were beneficial,
Hmm.
then interconnectedness is not required.
Yeah.
But we know both with the butterfly effect, domino effect that we have seen in nature,
Yeah.
right? As well as in our personal life, the more understanding we are of these nuances, I feel there is definitely a lot more clarity in terms of what to do, why to do, and how to do.
Yeah.
And of course, it is not from a knowledge perspective alone. It is about how can we embody it.
Right.
And so, in this context, I feel, and I've also heard about this from a non dual concept, which I think applies to all areas of life as well, which is realization happens at three levels: cognitively, emotionally, or at the level of the heart, at the level of the gut, or experienced lived sense, right?
Right.
So, when we talk about all of these frameworks or policies and everything else, even when we are talking about what hinders change or what propels change, is if a change is happening at the level of cognition, either through because I need to comply based on some compliance laws, or it is a metric I need to follow as a rule. Yes, it could work at some level, but it is still at the level of the mind, at the level of cognition. And mind by itself has its limitation because it creates division. It means it hasn't really percolated deep into you.
Yeah.
Which is why they say emotions are closer to your soul, or is an interpretation of what your body is going through, is because it's much more closer to our lived experience than the mind.
Right.
So, which means an emotional connection to the why, which again clarifies us through emotional intelligence that yes, emotions do drive action, right? And from the DIEB circle, we know that at the end of the day, we have 8 emotional needs. And the more connected and resonated we are at the level of that, it becomes a seamless response, so to say, because a lot of passion and purpose arrives from that place, for
Right.
sure. But that is still at the second layer, the heart and the emotion. The third, of course, it as a embodied lived experience, and that arises when it is not because the society said so or someone said so. It's just the nature of who someone is,
Right.
or what they embody. And when it happens at that level, I think in a way it percolates to another deep level, and I think probably that's where inspiration and a lot of other things come, because you see authenticity in its truest sense there.
Absolutely.
Because both thought and emotions have their limitations while they have their validity. Because if all emotions and thoughts were right, so to say, then we can do whatever. But there is a reason why we need to discern. The question of discernment comes because they come and go, and they are subjected to a lot of external as environmental aspects and conditioning and all of those things. So when we withdraw, either through mindfulness or whatever, these kind of practices, then we know what can trickle down even further, and then that's when it becomes a little bit of an embodied experience.
Right.
And I think that definitely helps in the coherence as well. And I think probably that's why the ancient Gurukul system as well, if you look at mythology and history, people knew all 64 art forms. It was never one thing that they learned.
Yeah.
So I think the more we trickle down into these aspects and bring in micro behaviors, bring it into the conversations that we have during hiring, during performance appraisals, during probably community engagement or whatever it is, from the nuanced understanding in terms of what makes someone take, what is their pain point and all of those things, it kind of helps them to navigate, because our schools and our society definitely help us with the technical knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's not where our issue currently is, right?
Right.
Which is why now they say emotional intelligence is definitely an important mark of leadership trait.
Yeah.
We have come to that place already, and a lot of research does prove that. So now we are pushing it to another level beyond emotional intelligence into the whole regenerative leadership spectrum. That's all.
Absolutely, Selection. I think we're moving to the last theme now, wisdom in complexity, navigating change with grace. You often speak about holding space and asking better questions. How do these skills help navigate uncertainty and transitions? And in moments of personal and organizational breakdown, what inner resources have helped you stay anchored, Selection?
Yeah, this whole thing about holding space and better questions again is basically from the idea that life has no rule book. We are not dealing with black and whites. We are mostly dealing with grays.
Yeah.
And people most often, they may have their own understanding and answers. But what people don't have is containers of safety where their fears, desires, and hopes can surface with curiosity, not with control. So when we hold space and ask better questions, we are allowing them to be who they are without judgment, right? And which is one of the reasons we go to therapists and coaches and to gurus and everything, because we see that there is either unconditionality there, non-judgment there,
Yeah.
right? That we will be safe to explore what it is to be a human in this uncertain world. So, and that's one of the reasons we are talking about these things, because even unfortunately within the spiritual fraternities as well, when you have shoulds and should nots, good and bad and right and wrong, what happens is either shame, guilt, judgment, those things invariably arise, right? Likewise, even in corporates, when we talk about how life is about learning and unlearning, we talk that life is a learning experience. Then why are we afraid of doing the wrong thing or making a mistake? And if we are saying that's the way of life, how can we ensure that we create a similar platform on the floor so that the youngsters also feel safe enough to do it? So that they don't take 15, 20 years to come to where we are and then, wait for things to happen later on in life. The idea of conscious actions and conscious change is also because we do not want to perpetuate dysfunctional or imbalanced dynamics anymore. Regenerative leadership, again, all of this, or when we talk about well-being because of COVID, all of this thing, if you see, it's a little bit of a hindsight of understanding, and it still has validity. Definitely, I think we should all be grateful for it. But I think now why we are bringing more conscious approaches like this is because why don't we bring it today in the right moments, right here, right now, so that we don't have to always wait for hindsight, eureka moment, right? So I think in that sense, uncertainty needs presence. It needs that allowance. So people, if they feel safe, then it definitely propels them to take things further from that safety, from that seen space. Because once you feel understood, or once you know that you're accepted, because belonging again is a very fundamental need. So when all of those things are met, then it becomes easier for them to find their own answers. And human beings are very adaptable. There is innate intelligence for sure. What we may not really have is community or a safe space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Selection. I think very, very reflective kind of podcast, I should say, because it's the first time As you were talking, a lot of mental pictures were being actually formed, and then I was actually going through a couple of relationships and the kind of difficulties which I actually faced. So I think it was a wonderful podcast, I should say, very very different to what I've done earlier, Sulakshana. I'm pretty sure. I think the listeners also are going to find it very very interesting and intriguing. I actually wrote down kind of goals and objectives for this in terms of exploring the intersection of regenerative leadership, systemic change, and inner transformation. And you gave a lot of examples there, and to uncover how people-centric leadership can balance organizational performance with human well-being, and to inspire future leaders with stories of sustainable, inclusive, and conscious workspace evolution through the 5 themes we actually covered that. Last but not the least, just a personal question, Selection. How did you actually come to Swami, and what did you learn from him?
So my dad was Swami's devotee, and so in a way I was part of the of my dad. However, I mean, um, while like if you look from the generational paradigm, I'm a millennial, which means we are not as rebelling as Gen Z is. But even as a millennial, um, people have felt that I rebel, not really from a rebelling perspective, but because of asking questions, right? And trying to bring conscious narratives and discussions. So for me, even while my dad had brought Swami into my life, and seeing my dad's faith has definitely been an important factor in my own life. I think my personal connection to Swami was with the fact of his own love is God, God is love, and love also will help us, hurt never, and all of that. So for me, all of those things appealed to me, and it made sense to me. And the more I decode his own quotes and life, I find a lot of deep resonation for sure. And those are my anchoring for sure. And interestingly, Swami's vision for the university is again self-realization, which is a very non-dual mindfulness approach, right? In that sense, and the service that we have towards universal values, that is definitely a big aspect of the SAI organization and the SAI institutions as well. So those things deeply resonate with me. Sure. And I also see that in action in Swami's life. Like for instance, when you talked about personal anchoring, is when I'm going through a very intense or difficult moment, there are a few masters or spiritual teachers that I go to because you experience love in their presence, right? And Swami is definitely one person who has embodied that in the human form. And I also see that in contemporary teachers who are also bringing a lot of light around mindfulness or non-duality. And you actually see their gait as well. They're very slow in their approach, and there is a lot of softness and all of that, which is again coming back to what regenerative leadership is about. The slowness is about, the softness is about, because it is very systemic. It understands that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in action, right?
Absolutely.
Literally. And so in that sense, it has really resonated with me. And I've also realized over the course of the journey that there are moments when we all have to wait to assimilate maybe a learning or an understanding. And so waiting may never be tasteful by itself, but how we wait makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
And through these practices and through these teachings and learnings around values, around consciousness, I feel we are able to integrate it. And Swami has definitely been someone who integrated that into my life. And like even finding this whole man management about specialization, so many things, you may be going down a certain road because it makes sense to you, and later on you realize, okay, actually Swami has also said that kind of validates it further, right?
Absolutely.
And it shows how his wisdom is available and it is about being open to it. And I think this is also why masters say that do not go by what I say, go by your own experience.
Absolutely.
Because invariably, our experience also takes us there.
Absolutely.
It is just taking time to sit with it and realizing that, yes, the whole world is my family, and how do we make it a living reality for our generation and future generations to come, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Lakshana. Thanks so much for your time. And I got to know more about you in terms of reading your blog, Selection. I have to be honest. And I I don't know whether you actually talk a lot or maybe you actually produce a bit more of video content as such. But I personally feel a lot of people across a cross section of generations would actually benefit from your insights, that the way you actually talk, and they'll be able to connect very, very well. I was just sharing key, I think, and I, again, unasked suggestions that sometimes I actually give, very rarely I do. But I think people are going to benefit a lot by you talking more. I know you write more, and people should be reading that. So thanks a lot for your time. I think I had a very, very good, I think almost 1 hour kind of a podcast this one. I'm going to release a lot of teasers, and maybe in a month and a half, I guess this will go live. Thanks so much for your time. And any concluding words, any feedback for us, the Monday Morning Learning Podcast team, most welcome.
There is, no real feedback. I think, like I said earlier, it's wonderful that you're trying to curate insightful sections and nuggets from people across various walks of life and sharing it with the community. And I think that's definitely a great thing to do. So
Sure.
It's been my privilege to be part of this conversation. And yes, I do not really speak. That is true. And I also write from time to time, mainly as putting it out there, and not really. It has not. I'm not really a social person, so it has not been a very conscious path for me.
Yeah.
But like I said, because when you had reached out as well, I said the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So if something happens, I'm open to it, but I've not really consciously worked towards that.
Sure.
But having said that, I am definitely someone who consumes podcasts and listens to a lot of things as well.
Sure.
And I think the more such conscious discussions do happen, it is definitely insightful, because then we glean from someone else's experience and what they worked through, and then take it from there. Let's see where the world takes us. But probably I will end with a quote that I read in the Regenerative Leadership book.
Sure.
I think it's so. It goes thus: part of the way our left hemisphere, which is the neocortex, works in order to analyze the world and solve problems is to break things down into their constituent parts to create boundaries. To make sense of the world, we apply the analytic scissors and create cuts in the seamless web of life. But we then forget that it is our own thinking that has created the cuts and the boundaries. And we think the cuts and the boundaries exist out there in the world. But my dear brothers and sisters, there is no cuts, there is no boundaries out there in the world. May we understand the interconnectedness of life, every moment of our lives, and work to create conscious practices. And may all of life thrive and flourish every moment of every day. Samasta loka sukhino bhavantu.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sulakshana. Excellent ending. Maybe sometime soon there's another S which might actually add to your first name. You already have Sai, right? So it might be Sadhguru Sulakshana in the near future, I guess.
Oh gosh.
Thank you so much, Sulakshana, today.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Thank you for having me.
Sai now.
Sir.